Some people love using something like an A10 Mini dedicated hardware to do the live streaming. It seems like that camp tends to be the more professional audio producers who travel often and need to have the stability and consistency and reliability is the most important thing for them. But now we're going to take a look at the alternative, which is to use a computer, Mac, Windows, Linux, and software like OBS, Open Broadcaster Software, or one of the commercial alternatives, to do all of your live streaming and capturing on a computer. In that case, you need some way to get the video into the computer, and you could use webcams and then you don't need any special device. But if you're using something like a mirrorless or DSLR camera that outputs HDMI, you need some way to capture that HDMI input into your computer. Here is a Elgato Cam Link, plugs into USB 3, takes HDMI. This can capture up to 4K. If you tried to connect a bunch of these to your computer at the same time, you'd probably start to run into limits of your USB bandwidth and have a hard time. But you can also buy a PCI capture card that would fit into your desktop PC that could capture from 4 HDMI inputs at potentially resolution up to 4K for all of them. Those cards are expensive. This little thing for capturing one HDMI is about $100. The cards that can capture 4 at once are upwards of $300 plus. And there's some debate about how reliable some of them are at capturing at 4K. I've got a Magewell that captures not at 4K at 1080, but it is rock solid. Okay, so what are the advantages to using software like OBS on a PC? The main advantage is the flexibility of setting up all kinds of different scenes, and you're working with a piece of computer software. This is an open source free piece of software, OBS, which is outstanding. And there are some commercial products as well that you can buy, although they tend to be expensive. I would recommend OBS. But there's plugins and scripts you can use for it, and it's easy to set up dozens of scenes that are configured in various different ways. I can do things like digitally zoom in on an image for my top down if I want to show a scene where it's close up. It's very easy to put text any way you want, set up timers, do all kinds of things, different transitions for different occasions, and it's all very easy to configure, as opposed to the hardware devices, which can be quite a bit of a pain to configure. You've also got the option, if you're running all this from a PC, of recording what you live stream, or using this software just to record and do your switching and then edit and upload later. But you can also use webcams as your input sources. You can more easily show video from your computer if you wanted to show the contents of a web browser or some other piece of software. Very easy to set up. What are the cons, though? There are some. One is reliability. If you've ever had your computer reboot on you or lock up, the idea of that happening during a live stream is a real possibility, and it's a little scary. You also have to have a fairly substantial high-powered desktop, and it needs to be right next to you, right wherever you're recording. It has to be, maybe within 10 foot even if you want to get big, long cables. So you need to have your powerful PC next to you. And you've got to then worry about the noise from that PC, not making too much noise from the fans, not generating too much heat. And it's going to depend on how much tinkering you want to do with software. There are some that the A10 Mini, the hardware devices just work right out of the box. The computer software is a little bit more of a learning curve just to get started, to do the basics, and a little more room for things to go wrong, like have a laggy stream, not have it be configured perfectly. You're going to have to spend a little bit more time in the beginning learning how to set it up. And, you know, it's open source software, so it's not always the most work has been put into the documentation, but there is a very active, helpful OBS community that will help you out. And as soon as you start doing more complicated stuff, something like OBS becomes easier to use than the dedicated hardware. There is the possibility of recording and streaming in 4K if that's something that matters to you. I don't think it's advisable in 2022 to be streaming in 4K, but if you were committed to recording everything on your PC, you at least have the possibility of recording in 4K. And I've talked about how front camera in 4K is not so important, but top down is important if you want to zoom and pan. And so it is a real possibility that you could connect just your top down camera as a 4K input and then have a couple scenes where you really zoom in on that 4K source, and you would get nice, clear, good image even zoomed in with a 4K capture. My advice now, I started out using the A10 Mini, which I loved. It's just wonderful that it works right out of the box. But I think at some point you may want to switch over to something like OBS. That's what I've done, and I love it. If you can set up your computer nearby your streaming, if that makes sense, then I like OBS. Let's take a look at some footage of what OBS looks like from where I am when I'm switching what I see, and then we'll spend a little time looking at the actual use of the OBS software, configuring it, setting up your scenes. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into OBS, Open Broadcaster software, and how you would use it to live stream. I've got my Elgato Stream Deck custom 15 keys here. And this is what I normally would use to control what's going out during a live stream. This is not the normal setup. Normally I'd have this sort of out of the way and the tablet wouldn't be here, but this is just to help you see a little better. After I show you how I would control it from in front of the camera, then we'll take a look behind the scenes at what OBS is doing and how to configure it. But let's first take a look at what it looks like to the audience as I mess with it, and what it looks like to me while I'm live streaming. So you can see here, I've got these keys configured. The first four here at the top row control my main cameras. So now we're looking at the front camera, but I can switch to the top-down camera. This is set for a wider view of the table. This would show the board if I was playing a board game. And then I've got a close-up view, which is showing here the Stream Deck, which are my buttons. You can see it's lit up a little brighter to show that's the camera it's on. This is actually a different camera than this top-down camera, although you could use the same camera and zoom in digitally, and I'll show you what that looks like now. I've got another button here that I use to zoom in even closer. This is as far zoomed in as this camera can go. If I click this, it's digitally zoomed in a bit. You can see this is, you would use this if you wanted to really look at a card in detail or read something. I've got a button here for a fourth source, which is a tablet if I'm playing a game that needs a tablet, or sometimes a laptop if I want to connect to the internet and use a laptop. I've got a screen here where if I'm connected to a YouTube live stream, I've got a split screen where I'm showing the live chat on the side. I've got a button here that I can use when I'm recording to make a little timestamp note, so I can come back and if I want to do some editing or put in a YouTube timestamp, I can put that here just by clicking this button. I've also got a set of buttons that switch off some overlays. So if we go to the top-down camera and I push the picture-in-picture button, you can see a front picture-in-picture shows up, and that will be shown at different sizes on the different cameras. There it is on the top-down, on the close-up, and on the tablet. I've also got one that will overlay the green screen. Sometimes I have a green screen over here, move this camera over here just looking at that, then I can overlay. That would be if you had little pieces or trinkets that you wanted to show up, or even a card that you wanted to overlay on top of the screen. So that's my main page of controls. Then I've got a secondary page here, which I use to switch to some of my breaks. For example, if I'm going to have a 5-minute break, I would click this one. And we'll see how to customize all that text, and that's a little counter. And then I've got other pages here that are related. I can do a countdown, I can do a general standby, I can do when the stream is ended. I've got a little one that shows a webcam that's off to the side there just for fun. I've got a button to show a video, a little intro video, which you can see there. It starts a little slow. Okay. And now let's go back to my main page. So I've got my main page for switching during broadcasting, then I've got a secondary page for breaks. I'll also show you something else I do from this screen. OBS has a studio mode. I'm going to show you that when we take a closer look at the user interface of OBS. But for now, if I click this, sorry, not this, toggle studio mode. So if I click this, I now, on my screen that I'm looking at, see two displays, two sources, and I can switch one. I can preview it before actually switching it on screen to what the audience sees. So on the left, I see what the source, but it's not sending it when I switch to it to the audience. So I can use this. I can say, oh, picture-in-picture should be off. And then when I'm ready to switch to that view, I can hit this button here and it switches to it. And sometimes the way I use this is, let's say I'm not in studio mode, I'm just broadcasting, I go to a 5-minute break. Okay, so the audience is seeing this 5-minute countdown, and that's what I see on my monitors. But when I come back, I might switch over to studio mode. Now I see side by side, and now I can switch the preview to the front camera. So now I'm looking at this, I can see what the front camera is going to look like when I switch to it, but the audience is seeing still the countdown timer. And then when I'm ready to transition back, I hit this button and we're live. All right, what else have I got? On the second page, I've got a bunch of other stuff I don't use very often. I've got the pure, let's get out of studio mode. I've got the pure webcam from the side. I've got a multi-view, which just shows me a bunch of different angles. I don't use this very often, but just to make sure all the sources, this is a good overview of everything. I normally wouldn't send this out to anyone, to the audience. Let me Go back to the front camera. Oops. Turn picture in picture off. Okay, let's see. What else do I have here? I've got a third. When I get to the third page, this isn't stuff I actually use while live streaming, but just where I put some stuff. Just I can adjust the brightness of the screen. I can see if it's recording or not. I can go to mute. I can change the picture in picture style here between a square and a circle. So for example, if we go to the top down and turn picture in picture on, I've got a circular one that I sometimes, it's too large, that I sometimes use, but not that often. Then I've got when I get to the fourth and fifth page, these are things that, this is sort of where I put stuff that I'm not using for the current broadcast, but I might use for another one. And let's see, what other one did I want to show you? I did want to show you as an example of something fancy you can do with OBS that's a little hard to do with ATEM or something. So if I switch to the tablet, okay, that makes sense. We've got a full tablet. But now, sometimes that tablet, if we're playing a game, for example, that's in portrait mode, it will look like this. That's fine, but sometimes it's nice to, if you know it's going to be in portrait mode, then you can have this on the screen most of the time, where you've got your front view, and then off to the side on an overlay is the portrait, which has been cropped to get rid of all the black sidebars on the left and right. And there we have a nice display. This would be like Chronicles of Crime, uses portrait mode. Okay, so there you have it. There's what it looks like for me when I'm switching a live stream, and what the Stream Deck can do in conjunction with OBS. Now we're going to take a look a little bit at behind the scenes at the OBS software itself, and how all these buttons that I use, what they're actually doing in switching, and how to set up scenes, etc. Now we're going to look at OBS, Open Broadcaster Software, in some detail. I should say there are a lot of YouTube videos on OBS from a beginner standpoint and advanced work. There are really fantastic videos out there to learn OBS. I'm not going to try to teach you OBS here. What I want to do instead is give you sort of a tour of the entire system, and then look at more specifically how I've set it up to use it, just so you can have some idea of what you could use OBS for, how you could use it. All right, so here's the main interface of the program. You can see there's a big preview window here. On the left, you can configure all of these windows in any way you want, arrange them on any side of the screen, resize them, etc. But this is how I've got my screen set up, and this is what I look at when I'm live streaming. This is what's on the monitor in front of me. So on the left, I have my audio, so I can make sure that the audio level is coming in loud enough and not too loud. OBS is organized into scenes. Each scene here, you see when you select one, is made up of sources. So the front camera scene has the capture card input 0, which is the front camera. And it also says in this scene, I want you to show the front camera audio. And then I've got two sources that are normally turned off. We'll talk about all that in a second. So continuing with our overview of the user interface, I've got a set of controls here for starting recording and starting streaming, and then some statistics to help you keep track of if you're dropping frames, how much CPU is being used to render everything. This is just to keep an eye on. Now, this would be the sort of normal OBS interface. I'm going to show you also, though, what I have two extra docks that I normally turn on. One is a column here that shows larger how long I've been recording and streaming, and dropped frames so I can see if something is going wrong. This is a browser-based custom dock that I've added and modified from someone else's. And then the other dock I turn on is a YouTube web page embedded. So OBS lets you embed web pages so you can customize them to do all sorts of different things. And what I do is I have my YouTube Studio web page open here so I can see when how it's broadcasting to YouTube and if there are any troubles. You could have that open in a separate window as well, but since this is this monitor is what I look at when I stream, I like to have everything visible on this screen. And we will do a stream and we'll look as we go, but before we start that, let's take a look at the different scenes and what they look like. So I showed you front camera has front camera audio and front camera video. Then I've got a top camera scene, which is capturing from my top down camera. Now you can see here it's actually overlaid a picture-in-picture of the front camera. And I'm going to turn that off here. Okay, so you can see if we just let's look at these cameras first, these main scenes. So we've got a front scene, top camera scene. I've got a third top-down camera, which is zoomed in. Then we've got a digitally zoomed in version of that. Then I've got camera coming in from the laptop. All of these, notice, all bring in the audio from the front camera. When I'm connected to the laptop or the tablet, I also show the audio you can see in the upper right that's being played through the tablet so that the audience can hear that as well. If I switch to this scene, it actually turns off my normal mic if I just want to show, if I don't want them to hear what's happening in the room, just to hear what's happening in the tablet, I would switch to that scene. And I want you to notice that whether it's on the top camera or the close-up camera or the laptop, they all have this front inset view, which is by default turned off. That front inset is actually the name of another scene. It's down here at the bottom, front inset. And this is my picture-in-picture from my front camera. And you can see what this scene looks like. When you toggle off a light means you can't see it. So I've got two versions of the picture-in-picture. One is square and one is circular. So you can see, and these are grouped. So in the squared front, we've got the video front camera source coming in. And then a little border background, which is this. You can see I can toggle it on and off. And you could actually make that picture-in-picture larger or smaller. So I've got one scene called front inset, which is the picture-in-picture. And then I've included that in all of these other scenes. The top camera, the close-up camera, the laptop or tablet. They can all have their own picture-in-picture. And I could, in fact, resize that specifically for that view to make it really small. So for some of these super close-ups, the picture-in-picture is quite small because I want to focus on this zoomed-in picture. But this shows you the kind of thing you can do with OBS. You can nest scenes within scenes, and picture-in-picture is a great way to use that. But you can do other combinations. Here I've got a split of the front view and the top-down view. Here's a split between the front view and a really close-up view. And you can do all sorts of things with that. For example, if you wanted that camera to move, or if you wanted that in a different position, you could select this view and you could move it to a different location. You can crop more of it or less of it. So if you wanted to have this part of it zoomed in here, So you can do all kinds of wonderful things with OBS. OBS makes that really easy to do. You can also embed other things on screens. Like here I have a browser window. If I wanted to open a web browser, I could put it here. Here is, whoops, we don't want to put the webcam, we're recording on that. Here's a good example of something nice you can do with OBS easily. Here I've got the tablet overlaid on my front view, but I've got different crops and aspect ratios depending on how the tablet is. So if I switch the tablet into portrait mode, I can switch on this view and it won't waste any space and be nicely displayed next to me as I go. Okay, I've got other scenes here. I've got a scene that just plays a video from a file. So that's the intro video solo scene. And you can see it's just a video file. And if we open this up, if I double click or right click and say properties, you can see how you configure it. It's configured to play a certain file. You can tell it whether to loop, whatever. You can resize it. And there's all that. Okay, so here's some other scenes. I use a whole bunch of scenes for when I take a break or when I count down. And this is another use of this nesting scenes. So I've got a base scene that I call title base. And that has some text here, which I can turn off and on. And you can see it's made up of these different lines. As I toggle them on, off and on, you can see them disappear. So that's the next game I'm playing. If you double click on this, you can edit this text here, change the font, etc. So that's the title section. Then I've got a section here where I put this, what's shown on the bottom of this title page. And then I can change the graphics here. I've got some winter graphics, but I've got other stuff I can put up. These are just video files. You could use whatever video file you want, resize it any way you want, etc. Okay, so I use this scene, title base, to be my the base of all my breaks and starting soon, and it's got a music file which is playing to the audience here. If it was, you can't hear it, but that's what's being sent out. And then I've got a whole bunch of derivative title scenes that all, you can see, make use of the title base. That's what's in the background. And then they overlay something on top, a top message, which is this header text. And then they overlay, in this case, it's sort of a web browser countdown. So I've got a little 30-second break, a 5-minute break. These are all being overlaid on top of that base scene. So anytime I change the text of that base, it'll be reflected in all my different scenes for breaks. So I only have to change this text once, and now it's shown on all my different break scenes. And this timer, this countdown, is all due to a web browser source, which is transparently overlaid. We can see if I double click this, you can see it's this file in this location with some arguments. This is a web page that I've written that can count down in different ways. You could resize it, reposition it, etc. We've got you saw already the front inset. I've got a green screen one that's not doing anything because it doesn't have a green background, but you can see if you look at this, if we look at the filters on this one, you can see this has got a chroma key filter that would make transparent any green behind it. Don't have it on this display, so it's not useful. But that's the kind of thing you can do. Here I have a multi-view that just shows all my cameras on one page. Some people might like to have this kind of view showing when they're broadcasting. What else do we have? And then we've got a couple more scenes that I don't use except for special purposes. So let's go back to our front camera now. All right, so you saw basically a scene is made up of sources. You can double click on a source to configure how it works. And actually, this is a good opportunity to show you a little bit about audio filters in OBS. So most of my scenes use the audio from the front camera. And if we right-click on that and say filters, we can see filters being applied to that audio signal. And there are some long tutorials on the web about how to set up filters to eliminate noise and make your voice sound better. It's pretty overwhelming and complicated, but if you play with it, you will find something. In general, we've got a filter that tries to eliminate background noise, just sort of the hum of the air conditioner or whatever. Then you can create an equalizer to tweak up your voice a bit. And then there's some expanders and compressors. Expanders and compressors basically work to make the quiet parts of your voice a little louder and the louder parts of your voice a little quieter. Or get rid of more gently sort of quiet silence that might be just background noises. And then a limiter just makes sure that when you talk very loudly, it doesn't start clipping and get too loud. So I'm not going to go into how you would set all these, just to give you some idea though that OBS does let you do some very fancy tweaking of your audio and your video. You can put filters on your video to do all kinds of things to improve the color, the brightness, all kinds of fancy stuff. Most of the time I don't use any of that for the video. Okay, so you've got scenes, you've got sources. We looked at stats. Now let's actually create a stream, start broadcasting so you can see what it looks like when I'm broadcasting. So OBS actually has some very sophisticated stuff that lets it interact with your YouTube channel that you've configured. And we're going to use a little bit of, you don't have to, but we'll use it for this. So I'm going to click Manage Broadcast. And we can select from a previously scheduled broadcast that we might have scheduled on YouTube, or it'll create a new one. So we're going to create a new one, a private one here, so that no one else can see this. And we're just going to say Create Broadcast. Okay, it's created this broadcast now, which it's highlighted this. And now we're going to start, now we're actually, let me go back to Manage here. I'm going to bring this up a little so you can see it. So here's the broadcast. It's actually scheduled. Remember, this is just a web page. You could open up YouTube Studio in your separate browser and you'd see this. So it's created this entry, and I can click on this. This is what it would look like if you went to YouTube Studio web page and looked at it, and you can see this is what I look at when I'm about to start a stream. It's got settings here. It'll tell you how the health of the stream. Right now we're not actually broadcasting, it's waiting. So we're going to say start streaming. Now when I have OBS configured to record whenever I stream, so it's going to start recording as well. So I want you to take a look at over here on the right as well as down here. So we're going to say start streaming. Okay. So look at everything that's happened. First of all, you can see that it says we're live and recording in the bottom right. Here's the YouTube Studio page, which shows us shows what's being sent to the audience. Audience is seeing this. Then we've got my little window here, which is telling me that I'm on the air, how long I've been on the air, the data rate to make sure everything's fine. Any frames skipped, you'd want to look at this. If you started dropping frames, you'd start to worry that you don't have a good enough internet connection. Here I can see that I'm recording. And now normally I won't have this. When I'm live streaming, I want to see the screen as big as possible. So normally what I'll do is I'll actually drag this all the way down because I don't really need to see this. But what I do like to see is I do like to see this thing here. Stream status is excellent, this bottom left text, just so I make sure that I can see that I'm actually streaming. And maybe if you wanted to, you'd want to look at how many viewers. So I like to have this small. I don't really need to see this most of the time. But this will just show me that it's actually reaching YouTube. People are seeing it. Everything's fine. You could also open this in a separate window. And now we're actually streaming. Now I have this doc here, this tally doc, to help me keep track of how long it's been since I've taken a break. So this session thing tells me how long I've been recording since I took a break. So if I switch actually to a 5-minute break. Okay, now we're in a break, and you can see down below the YouTube stream is a little bit delayed, but it's going to switch in to show that break after it reaches its delay. Now we're in a break. We've been on the air 2 minutes, almost 2 minutes in this session. But now notice that I've got a little break timer in the upper right that shows me I've been on break for about 25 seconds. And now when I come back from break, whenever that's going to be, you're going to see that this session is going to reset to 0, and this will go away in the upper right. So let's do it. Let's switch back to our front camera, and you can see now this session is reset. So this is not part of normal OBS. This is just my little display to help me keep track of how long I've been streaming between breaks and to remind me when to take a break. If I just move this up a little bit so we can see better, again, you might have this open in a separate window on YouTube. You can see how many viewers you have, the quality of the stream, etc. And you could rearrange this in a different place in the window. But for me, since this is not that important for me to see, I like to have that minimized to the smallest amount of space. I just need to see that the stream is in good shape. Maybe I want to see how many people are watching, concurrent viewers. And then I just leave this alone. I pay attention mainly to this screen. All right, well, let me show you one more thing before I close this. I'm going to raise this up again so you can see this. So remember that the YouTube stream has got a delay in it. So for example, I'm going to change to the top-down camera, and you'll see it changes here. But here's what this is what people on YouTube are seeing. So it's going to take a couple seconds before they get the new change of scene. Okay, so there you see the kind of delay that you'll see on YouTube. And you can stop streaming from here. I always have it to record and stream at the same time. The other thing I want to show you is, let me just show you what studio mode looks like here. There's a button for it in the interface. Now remember, I'm changing scenes here with my mouse, but normally some people do use a mouse on a monitor while they're broadcasting and actually work with OBS while they're broadcasting. For me, I like to use the Elgato Stream Deck keys, which you've seen how they're set up in front of the camera, but that gives more flexibility and less hassle. And one of the things that I can switch there is I can go into studio mode, which I'm going to click here and do that now. All right, let's close this, but I'm going to keep it high enough so you can still see in here. Now, studio mode shows two screens. On the right, where it says program, this is what's being sent out to YouTube. And on the left, where it says preview, this is what, when I change views now, this is just lets me see the view. It's a preview of what I can transition to. So no matter what I change here, this is what's getting sent out to YouTube, which is what you see down here in the lower left. If I want to now transition to this scene, I click this button, transition. So this would be useful if you're getting ready to change to the top view and then you realize, oh, I don't want the picture-in-picture on, so I'm going to turn that off. Okay, this is what I want to switch to. I rearrange it on the table, and then I click this button, transition, and here we are. Now this is what we're sending to YouTube, which is going to show up down here in the lower left after the little YouTube delay. There you go. And you can set up transitions in OBS. Instead of this cut, you could have a nice fade. So now when we want to transition to the front, I'm going to click this. You'll see it fades in. You can control the duration of the transition, etc. Tons of flexibility with OBS. Okay, I'm going to stop streaming here. Okay, we stopped streaming. OBS has recorded that file for us, so not only is it on YouTube, but it is recorded on a local hard drive in MP4 format. And this stream has stopped. I'm going to click End Stream to end it on YouTube. And there we have it. And remember, this is just our YouTube page, so we could go look at it and play it, etc. Okay, let's minimize this. Let me see what else to show you in OBS. I'm going to turn off studio mode. This is how I normally have it. I don't use studio mode for the most part, mainly just because I like to have as big a preview as I can in my monitor so I can see that the quality is okay, etc. But studio mode is not a bad idea if you're coming back from break or whatever. Let's take a minute to look at some of the options in OBS. I'm not going to do a comprehensive explanation of everything, but just to give you an idea. In fact, let's start with the menu here. StreamFX is an add-on for effects that you won't really need. Tools, you don't really need much in there. I'll show you one script I have running. This is a script that lets me bring up, when I'm streaming, the live chat on screen while I'm talking. That makes it a little easier for people to follow along. So OBS does support add-ons via scripts and add-ons via plugins. In OBS, let's go back to the main view here. In OBS, you've got two places you can save settings. In profiles, you can create as many profiles as you want. Profiles have every other setting that you will configure, but not your configuration of your scenes. And then scene collections are the configurations of your scenes. So you can switch back and forth between different scene collections and different profile settings. It's a good way to let you keep backups of your favorite settings and try things. Docs are these things here, these windows here. So this is a user doc, JR Tally, which is here. I could disable it or turn it back on. And there's a built-in one for YouTube chat, which is shown here. You can bring that out in a separate window. You could dock it off to the other side of the screen, etc. Okay, those are docs. Let's turn that one off. And then there's a bunch of docs that you've already seen out here. In addition to studio mode, there's also something called multi-view mode. I'll bring that up in a window so you can see it. You can actually configure all of your sources to display on the screen at the same time. And you could use this to switch between, to transition between scenes very easily. So it's possible that if you were broadcasting on YouTube, that maybe this would be the display you'd like. And you'll switch scenes visually by saying, okay, now I want to switch to this scene. Now I want to go back and switch to this scene. So that's multi-view, and you can configure how many get displayed here in the option. You probably won't need 18. Okay. Now let's look at the settings, just give you some idea of what options are available. Obviously, tons of options in OBS. Options for what goes into the system tray, how studio mode works, how multi-view works. You've got options to connect your YouTube channel, but you could also stream to Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, and then a couple others that are sort of middlemen streaming destinations that will stream to multiple places at once. You can configure the bit rate of your streaming video different options. A lot of options you won't want to mess with, but occasionally if you're trying to stream and you don't have good enough bandwidth, you might reduce this, where recordings go, what quality they should be in. Audio options, you can set some default global audio. I like to turn that off and just manually set for each scene what audio I want to be sent. Then the resolution of your capture and your resolution of your stream being sent, usually they're the same. 1080p seems to be the standard, but you could mess with that if you want. A whole bunch of customizable hotkeys. If you're using a keyboard to do stuff, you could set custom hotkeys to do lots of stuff. And even if you're using that Elgato Stream Deck, occasionally you'll set up a hotkey to do something and then have a button trigger that hotkey. And then a bunch of stuff that you probably don't need to mess with. So there is OBS, a quick tour of everything and a quick tour of the scenes and setups that I use.